After decades of research, climate scientists have presented many possible scenarios for the future of the planet. Because of uncertainties about effects of all the feedbacks involving atmosphere, ice caps, and oceans, they still can't say precisely what will happen.
I can imagine so-called feedback processes, where if you warm up the Earth, you melt snow and ice, which adds further warming. If you do that, it makes the clouds taller, which makes them trap more heat instead of wider. And if I conjure up these feedbacks, I can end up expecting that we could have climate change that's catastrophic in the next century. I can also conjure up another set of feedbacks. The clouds get wider, that it gets drier in between the clouds. There are a number of feedbacks we can conjure up, which makes it warm up only a degree or so at the relatively mild end of the spectrum. Well, most scientists would argue that this very mild and very catastrophic outcomes are plausible, maybe even a 10% chance of each of them. But the bulk of the likelihood is somewhere in between the end of the world and the good for you scenarios that you see all the time in the newspapers and in the congressional debates.
While scientists remain unsure of how the climate will change if CO2 continues to rise, they're certain we have already altered the composition of the atmosphere. Continued burning of fossil fuels now poses a credible threat to the climate. And since there are vast untapped supplies of fossil fuels in the Earth's crust just waiting to be exploited, today's greenhouse emissions might be eclipsed by what is to come.
If we burned all the coal in a couple hundred years, we would very likely increase the atmospheric CO2 concentration by more than a factor of 10. That's huge. There would be no debate about anthropogenic climate change, man-made climate change. It would be clear as a bell. Once we have driven up CO2 levels in the atmosphere, for it to come back down, it would take a very long time. My timescale for that is thousands of years.
If a skeptic says that he or she is not worried about doubling, ask them about tripling or quadrupling. And ask them about all the other gases besides carbon dioxide, some of which are increasing faster than CO2. There comes a point where you can't escape the idea that you're having serious climatic consequences. And so the issue becomes one of guessing whether we get wise before that day, or whether we have to wait for some perhaps quite unanticipated climate surprise that wakes us all up.